In the early years of the 20th century, the United States of America stood at a distance from the fires burning across the Atlantic. Europe was restless, full of old rivalries and new weapons, but America watched from afar, believing the ocean was wide enough to protect its peace. Cities were growing, factories were humming, and families believed the future would be brighter than the past. In a small town in Ohio lived Thomas Whitaker, a 19-year-old son of a factory worker. His life was simple, long hours helping his father, evening walks with his younger sister Emily, and dreams that stretched beyond the smokestacks of his town. He had never seen war. To him, it was something found only in newspapers and history books. Across the ocean, in 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand shattered Europe's fragile balance. Nations mobilized armies, alliances dragged countries into conflict, and within months, the world was at war. America, under President Woodrow Wilson, declared neutrality. The nation wanted peace, and many Americans believed this was not their fight. By 1915, reports of brutal trench warfare began to reach American shores. Newspapers described muddy battlefields, poison gas, and endless rows of dead soldiers. Still, most Americans carried on with their lives, trusting their leaders to keep the nation out of bloodshed. That trust was shaken when the British passenger ship Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine. Among the dead were American citizens. The news spread like fire. In Ohio, Thomas watched grown men fall silent as they read the headlines. For the first time, war felt close. At dinner that night, his father spoke in a low voice. "War doesn't stay far forever," he said. Thomas did not reply, but something heavy settled in his chest. Germany's use of unrestricted submarine warfare continued, and then came the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany secretly encouraged Mexico to attack the United States. The message was intercepted, published, and ignited American anger. In April 1917, President Wilson stood before Congress and declared that the world must be made safe for democracy. America entered World War I. Posters appeared everywhere, calling young men to serve their country. "I want you for U.S. Army." Thomas saw them daily on his walk to work. He felt fear, pride, and uncertainty tangled inside him. When he finally told his family he would enlist, his mother wept quietly. Emily clung to his arm. His father nodded, eyes filled with unspoken worry. Training camps transformed ordinary boys into soldiers. Thomas learned to march, to shoot, to obey orders without hesitation. He met men from every corner of America, farmers, immigrants, students, all wearing the same uniform, sharing the same fate. By 1918, Thomas stood on French soil. The land was scarred, the air heavy with smoke and sorrow. Trenches cut through the earth like open wounds. Rats crawled through mud, and the sound of artillery never truly stopped. Days blurred together in darkness and dirt. Soldiers waited for orders, knowing each command could be their last. Gas masks hung around their necks like grim reminders of invisible death. Thomas watched friends fall, not in heroic charges, but slowly, claimed by sickness, shell shock, or a sniper's bullet. At night, he wrote letters home. "I am still alive," he always began, knowing those words mattered most. One morning, the order came to advance. Whistles blew. Men climbed out of trenches into a storm of gunfire. Thomas ran, heart pounding, feet slipping in mud. He did not think, thinking was dangerous. Survival depended on instinct. When the attack ended, the field was silent except for the wounded. Thomas survived, but the boy who had left Ohio was gone forever. In November 1918, the guns finally fell silent. Germany signed the armistice. Church bells rang across America. Parades filled the streets. People celebrated victory, believing the war had ended all wars. Thomas returned home a hero, but inside he felt hollow. Loud noises made him flinch. Sleep brought nightmares. The country moved forward, but the scars of war remained, both seen and unseen. The 1920s followed, full of jazz, automobiles, and optimism. America believed in progress. Yet beneath the excitement, unresolved tensions lingered. The Treaty of Versailles punished Germany harshly, leaving bitterness behind. Few noticed the warning signs. Thomas married, found work, and tried to build a peaceful life. He hoped his children would never see what he had seen. The Great Depression of the 1930s shattered American confidence. Banks failed, jobs vanished, and families struggled to survive. Meanwhile, across the world, new leaders rose, men who fed on anger and humiliation. In Germany, Adolf Hitler promised glory and revenge. In Italy, Mussolini marched. In Japan, militarism grew stronger. The world was drifting toward another catastrophe. America once again chose isolation. The memory of World War I was too painful. Never again, people said. In Europe, 1939 arrived with invasion. Germany attacked Poland. World War II began. Thomas, now older, watched the news with dread. He had a son, James Whitaker, who listened carefully to every report. The past was repeating itself. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, America's isolation ended in flames and smoke. The nation awoke in shock and anger. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it, "a date which will live in infamy." James enlisted within weeks. Thomas stood silently as his son packed his bag. He wanted to warn him, to protect him, but he knew the truth: some storms could not be avoided. As James left, Thomas realized the war he thought he had survived was not over. It had only passed to the next generation. When James Whitaker arrived at boot camp in early 1942, America was already transforming into a nation at war. Factories that once made cars now produced tanks. Women replaced men on assembly lines. Radio broadcasts carried news from the front every hour, and maps with colored pins hung in homes across the country. James was 20 years old, strong, hopeful, and unaware of how deeply war could carve itself into a man's soul. His father, Thomas, wrote to him often, careful not to burden his son with the memories he still carried from World War I. Instead, Thomas spoke of courage, duty, and coming home. James trained hard. He learned to fire rifles, throw grenades, and move as part of a unit. Officers reminded them constantly that this war was different. It was global. It was total. And it would not end quickly. By mid-1942, James was assigned to the European theater, while many of his friends were sent to the Pacific. America would fight on two fronts, against enemies who showed little mercy. James crossed the Atlantic in a crowded transport ship, always alert for German U-boats lurking beneath the waves. At night, the sea was dark and silent, broken only by the low hum of engines and whispered prayers of soldiers missing home. In England, American troops prepared for the largest invasion in history. Britain bore the scars of bombings, and its people welcomed American soldiers with tired smiles and shared hope. James trained relentlessly. Marching, practicing amphibious landings, studying maps of the French coastline. They all knew one word: D-Day. No one knew the date, but everyone knew the cost. The night before the invasion, the sky over the English Channel was heavy with clouds. James sat quietly, gripping his helmet, listening to the waves hit the side of the landing craft. Around him, men checked their weapons, some joking nervously, others silent. As dawn broke, German machine guns opened fire. The beaches of Normandy exploded into chaos. Water turned red. Men fell before reaching shore. Orders were drowned out by explosions. Fear clawed at James's chest, but training pushed him forward. He ran. He fired. He survived. By the end of the day, Allied forces had secured a foothold in France, but at a terrible cost. Thousands lay dead. James would never forget the faces of men who had been alive just hours earlier. From Normandy, the Allies pushed inland. Town by town, hedgerow by hedgerow, they fought German forces retreating but still deadly. France was liberated. Paris celebrated. But the war was far from over. In the winter of 1944, Germany launched a desperate counterattack through the Ardennes forest. Snow fell heavily. Supplies ran low. American soldiers froze in foxholes, surrounded and under constant threat. James fought in bitter cold, his fingers numb, his spirit tested. The enemy was relentless. Casualties mounted. Yet American forces held the line. When the German advance finally collapsed, it marked the beginning of the end in Europe. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. Crowds celebrated across America and Europe. Church bells rang again. For a moment, it felt like peace had returned. While Europe celebrated victory, the Pacific War raged on. Japan fought fiercely, refusing surrender. Island by island, American forces advanced through brutal combat. James was reassigned to the Pacific in late 1945. The heat was suffocating. Jungle warfare was nothing like Europe. The enemy was often unseen, attacks sudden and deadly. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa revealed the terrifying reality: an invasion of mainland Japan would cost millions of lives, American and Japanese. Back home, President Harry S. Truman faced an impossible decision. In August 1945, America dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Days later, another fell on Nagasaki. The destruction was unlike anything the world had ever known. Cities vanished. Lives ended in seconds. James heard the news through military channels. There was relief, because the war would end, but also unease. Victory came with a weight no celebration could erase. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. World War II was over. James returned to Ohio thinner, quieter, changed. Thomas recognized the look in his son's eyes immediately. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning. They never spoke much about the war. They didn't need to. America emerged from World War II as a global superpower. The United Nations was formed. Soldiers returned home. Suburbs grew. Babies were born. Hope returned. Yet the world was divided again, this time by ideology. The Cold War had begun. Thomas often wondered if humanity would ever learn. Years later, James would tell his children stories, not of battles, but of friendship, sacrifice, and the cost of hatred. He wanted them to understand that freedom was fragile, and peace was a responsibility, not a guarantee. The United States had crossed oceans, defeated tyranny, and changed the course of history. But the true victory, James believed, would be a world that chose understanding over violence.